Server meshing test E was pretty wild. Lots of crashes and loading screens, but we did see nearly 2,000 players all together in one shard. The 800 player shard was probably the most successful large test that CIG have run so far, but it did again highlight some major work that will have to happen for 4.0 if CIG want to chase these sorts of numbers. This test started, as these ones always do, with 100 players to validate everything, and then we quickly moved up to 1,000 players. Now, I did not have great luck here. This is probably my worst experience with 1,000 players. I just couldn't get in, lots of loading in the 30Ks. And when I finally did get in, we've got this nice new bit on display info which shows us the population for the shard and the server, which is very handy. But you'll notice there's not really anybody around for me. And once I find out where they are, we're all in the elevator, I realise there's a significant issue in Lawville, it seems, that the elevators just are not working whatsoever. I tried backspacing to try and go to hospital, but footage is sped up, but I've eventually just respawned in the elevator again. But eventually I did manage to log out the server, get back in, and I spawned in the hospital. And you can see here that the screens aren't working, so I don't know if that's just a general issue with all screens in Lawville. I don't know what's happening, but you can see here there is good kind of player movement. The server FPS is fine, the ping kind of is fine, but players are moving around. But again, problems with the elevators. It's not perfect, and you'll see at some points there's some big stalls where things just stop. You'll see everything stopped. The net ping spikes to 2,000 there, and yeah, there's definitely issues with this, but similar to the last 1,000 player test, it's not too bad, and we didn't have that particular hybrid crash which was causing havoc last time. Benoit said that they're now going to prepare to go to a 10 server 2,000 player shard. So their expectations for this were that it would be very rough, but we want to validate a few hypotheses which would need even more channels open. So my experience with this was kind of, as you might expect, very rough, as he said. You can see here that interaction delay, there is a bit more. It's not crazy as it has been in the past, but we are seeing delay from when you press things, and there's just wonkiness in general. The server FPS is already down pretty significantly, but you can see there at the population that there's 274 people on my particular server around Microtech, and we're not actually quite anywhere near the 2,000 player mark yet. There's ping spikes, all sort of stuff, and we are flying through space in the elevator, but that's fine, we'll take that. Again, a stall there where the bandwidth in has just gone to 0. And you'll notice that really there's signs of people moving. There's kind of occasional kind of spurts of people and other players moving around, but in general, we're struggling here. There is significant issues, and you'll see people again do that idle animation that you kind of sometimes see when the network just isn't updating what people are doing. But I do get onto the train, and eventually people do kind of pop onto the train. Again, we've seen this sort of behavior in the past. Another big spike there of network ping, of stalling basically of the whole thing, and people then do pop onto the train. But I didn't get much further than this. I tried this, eventually crashed, and then I basically spent a lot of time trying to load back in, but I just couldn't get back in. There were some serious issues with this, but hopefully, again, the data that they would have got from this would have been useful. And as Benoit said here, very interesting observations at the moment for performance and stalls at those numbers. He then said that they've tweaked some values to see if they can squeeze more throughput around an issue. Someone had said, what issue is that? And he said it's a combination of things, mostly around throughput and parallelization on the hybrid, which is what we keep optimizing day in, day out. After these tweaks had happened, after these, whatever they'd done to try and fix this issue, I, again, couldn't really get in. I'm in the server here, but I can't move. And yeah, it wasn't like a fun experience, but that's what they said. They said it'd be very rough. And then they said they've got enough data and they're going to take it back to a 6 server 800 configuration, which was quite an interesting test in some ways. You can see here that I'm in a 600 player shard, 194 on my server. Server FPS at this stage is locked to 30, so it's pretty impressive. And very responsive again. Getting the things out of the item kiosk worked pretty well. No interaction delay. I mean, it's quite a lot of servers for this number of players, but it's working fairly well. You can see again, player movement. It's not bad. You can see these people, there's not massive load of teleporting at this stage. People are moving around, and it seems as though this sort of, although there's a stall potentially, but it seems at this stage that around this player number actually performs pretty well. And you might start to think, oh, maybe this might be realistic for something like 4.0. Maybe this is where they'll go for, because as you can see still, 7 FPS, although the server's only been up for like a minute, it's still holding up pretty well, and just generally the experience isn't bad. There's a little bit of desync, and well, maybe a bit more than a little bit, but a stall there, you see everybody stops moving, but does seem to recover. Everybody comes back in, moving around as you'd expect. So you might think, yeah, this is fine. Maybe 800 will be some sort of thing that they can aim for 4.0, but as you can see here, it just is not going to happen. There's no way, I don't think, based on what happens here, that you can get 800 people on one of these shards for 4.0 unless they do a major refactor of the infrastructure for this sort of area. So I now then spent maybe 20 minutes trying to get on into one of these lifts. It's almost impossible. There's just too many players and there's not enough lifts. Somebody asked, can we expect to see the population counter get added to future builds, or is it only for the meshing tests? And this is a really interesting answer, not necessarily to do with population counter, but most of the changes that we do for the tech previews get integrated into 4.0 as we go along. So there's a sense where I previously said, how long is this going to take for them to do all this work and then merge it back into the main branch? But that actually seems as though they're putting things in as they go. And so I don't think we're at that stage now, but there is a chance that it won't take necessarily quite as long once they've worked out how they want to do it and getting the tech as well, working as well as they want it to. It might not take as long to get it all back into the main branch, because the development branch, because they're doing it as they go. So that's good news, at least. I then woke up, I didn't actually have much time to do the testing in the night, but I've woken up today and gone back in, and this is an interesting thing. There's only 77 players on this server that I'm playing on. And so I've got out into space, but you can see, interestingly, the server FPS is still really low. We're at 9. And so what we're going to do here is swap between servers, and it's going to highlight something else that CIG are going to have to work on. So you can see we've gone from 25, which was the Microtech server, to 60, and 60, the server FPS, is locked at 30. And so there's definitely going to need to be some balancing as we now switch back to 25, and that's gone back down to 7 again. There's definitely going to need to be some balancing of the kind of load between these servers, and then we again switch back into the space one, 60, locked at 30 FPS again, and we end up at Calliope, which is a different server completely, 57, but again, that is locked at 30. So they're going to have to do some serious work around balancing the kind of load on these different servers. Even with only 80 players on it, one of the servers is still really, really struggling, and so that could be down to all sorts of things. Somebody might have spawned, who knows, 100 picos, and it might have been sort of ruining that server, who knows. But I just want to point out at this point that there's so many little things that they still need to work out. There's so many bits on the actual tech, but then there's also so many bits in terms of the actual game. How is it going to work? And as I said before, numbers around 800, it kind of, the tech sort of worked pretty well, but the game just cannot handle that. I mean, I can't see how they're going to make that work for 4.0, but I should probably know better by this point than to guess. Guessing is always a bad idea with Star Citizen, because you'll always get it wrong in one direction or another. But all around, this was a really interesting test. Really crazy numbers to see, and fairly broken in parts, but hopefully CIG will give us a really good load of information in the next report that Benoit does.